Vivien Leigh was not just a star. She was a force of nature. A woman of unyielding determination, she waged wars on multiple fronts, battling for the iconic role of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, fighting for love in a world that often stood in her way, and enduring a lifelong, grueling struggle with bipolar disorder, a battle few knew she faced. Her life was a tapestry of passion, pain, and unparalleled artistry. Buckle up, because here's a dazzling dive into the life of the unforgettable Vivien Leigh, a woman who truly made the world give a hoot. Vivien Leigh's entrance into the world was as dramatic as her life would become. Born on November 5, 1913, Guy Fawkes Day, a date celebrated in England with fireworks and bonfires, little Vivien Mary Hartley arrived with a bang in Darjeeling, India. Though she would later become the epitome of the Southern Belle, Leigh's roots were far from the American South. Her father, Ernest Hartley, was a Scottish stockbroker, and her mother, Gertrude Robinson Yakji, was of Irish descent. But here's where it gets intriguing. Some whispers in the annals of history suggest Gertrude may have had Armenian or even Indian heritage, a fact Leigh would later obscure to navigate the prejudices of Hollywood. At the tender age of 6, Leigh's life took a turn that would shape her resilience. Her parents sent her to a strict English boarding school, where she spent 2 long years without seeing her mother. Isolated and yearning for connection, young Vivien confided in her schoolmates, declaring with unwavering conviction that she would become a great actress someday. Little did she know how prophetic those words would be, or the price she would pay for that greatness. The 1930s brought love, or at least what Leigh thought was love. At just 19, she fell head over heels for Herbert Lee Holman, a barrister 13 years her senior. Despite studying at the prestigious Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, Leigh abandoned her training to marry Holman on December 20th, 1932. The honeymoon phase, however, was fleeting. Their age gap and differing ambitions soon created a chasm between them. Yet for a time, they found happiness. Just 10 months after their wedding, Leigh gave birth to their daughter, Suzanne. But becoming a mother at 19 came with its own set of challenges, and Leigh's dreams of stardom never wavered. Leigh's ambition was as fierce as her talent. When she landed an uncredited extra role in the 1935 film Things Are Looking Up, she didn't hesitate to leave a romantic cruise with her husband to seize the opportunity, even though the role consisted of a single line. It was around this time that her agent insisted Vivien Holman wasn't a name fit for a star. After rejecting laughable suggestions like April Morn, Leigh crafted her stage name from her husband's middle name, Leigh, and tweaked Vivien to the more exotic Vivian. With her new identity, she was ready to conquer Hollywood, no matter the cost. In 1935, Leigh's star finally began to rise. At 22, she landed the role of Henriette in the scandalous play The Mask of Virtue. Her performance was nothing short of electrifying, earning her standing ovations and rave reviews. Overnight, she became the talk of the town, her name synonymous with talent and allure. But as her professional life soared, her personal life began to unravel. When Vivien Leigh stepped into the theater to watch a play starring Laurence Olivier, England's most electrifying new actor, she had no idea her life was about to take a dramatic turn. As the curtain rose and Olivier commanded the stage with his magnetic presence, Leigh leaned over to a friend and whispered, "That's the man I'm going to marry." It was a bold declaration, especially considering 2 glaring obstacles. Leigh was already married to her husband, Herbert Lee Holman, and Olivier was happily, or so it seemed, wed to actress Jill Esmond. But Vivien Leigh was never one to let pesky details like marriage vows stand in her way. Vivien Leigh was a woman who knew what she wanted, and she wanted Laurence Olivier. After the final bow, as the audience erupted into applause, Leigh made her move. She slipped backstage, breezed past the stagehands, and appeared in Olivier's dressing room like a vision. Introducing herself with a mix of charm and confidence, she struck up a conversation with the star. But Leigh wasn't content with just a chat. As she left the room, she paused, leaned in, and planted a daring kiss on Olivier's neck. It was a bold, calculated move, and it worked like a charm. Olivier was instantly captivated. The spark between them was undeniable, and it was only the beginning of a love story that would captivate the world. Leigh's career was on the rise, thanks to her star-making performance in The Mask of Virtue. Soon after, she landed a lucrative contract and a role in the big-budget historical epic Fire Over England. The film was a major milestone for Leigh, but the real draw wasn't the sweeping cinematography or the lavish costumes. It was her co-star, none other than Laurence Olivier. Fate, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. Or perhaps it was Leigh's doing all along. On set, the chemistry between Leigh and Olivier was palpable. What began as professional admiration quickly blossomed into a full-blown affair. They started as co-stars, then became confidants, and soon they were inseparable lovers. Their relationship was a scandal waiting to happen. Both were married and both had young children at home. But Leigh and Olivier were swept up in a whirlwind of passion, and neither seemed to care about the consequences. Olivier left his wife, Jill Esmond, and their toddler son less than a year after meeting Leigh. However, their path to happiness wasn't straightforward. Both of their spouses refused to grant divorces, forcing the couple to keep their relationship under wraps. For years, they lived in the shadows, stealing moments together whenever they could. Their love was as intense as it was forbidden. In surviving love letters between the two, Olivier's words reveal the depth of their passion. He called Leigh very naughty and confessed to waking up absolutely raging with desire for you, my love. In one particularly eyebrow-raising passage, Olivier even admitted to wearing Leigh's undergarments, a testament to the playful, kinky side of their relationship. Their connection was fiery, all-consuming, and impossible to ignore, but the fun times would not last. In 1937, Vivien Leigh was living a life that seemed plucked straight from a Hollywood fairy tale. Her career was skyrocketing, her beauty was the talk of the town, and she had the dashing Laurence Olivier by her side. But beneath the glittering surface, a storm was brewing. Leigh's struggle with bipolar disorder, a condition poorly understood at the time, began to cast a shadow over her seemingly charmed life. The first major crack in her facade appeared during a performance of Hamlet, where Leigh played the tragic Ophelia. On stage, she was mesmerizing, but offstage, her mental health took a devastating turn. One evening, as Olivier entered her dressing room, Leigh suddenly erupted into a fit of screaming. It was as if a switch had been flipped. One moment she was calm, the next she was consumed by rage. Just as quickly as it began, the episode ended, leaving Olivier shaken and bewildered. He later described the incident as surreal, saying it was like watching two different people inhabit the same body. Sadly, this was only the beginning of Leigh's battle with an illness that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Despite these personal challenges, Leigh was determined to conquer Hollywood. When Olivier landed the coveted role of Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, Leigh set her sights on playing Kathy, his fiery on-screen love interest. But the director had other plans. He wanted Merle Oberon for the part. When Leigh was offered a supporting role instead, she didn't just decline. She delivered a line that would go down in Hollywood history: "I'll play Kathy or I'll play nothing." It was a bold, gutsy move, and it paid off. Leigh's unwavering confidence and refusal to settle for less than she deserved earned her the role, proving that she was a force to be reckoned with. Around the same time, Leigh found herself bedridden after breaking her ankle. With nothing but time on her hands, she picked up a copy of Margaret Mitchell's sweeping epic, Gone with the Wind. From the very first page, Leigh was captivated. When she learned that producer David O. Selznick was planning to adapt the novel into a film, she knew she had to play Scarlett O'Hara. "I've cast myself as Scarlett," she boldly told a journalist. And from that moment on, she pursued the role with what Olivier later described as demonic determination. Selznick, however, wasn't convinced. He admired Leigh's talent, but thought she was too British to play the quintessential Southern belle. After gently turning her down, he assumed that was the end of it. But Leigh wasn't one to take no for an answer. She packed her bags, moved to Los Angeles, partly to be closer to Olivier, who was already there, but mostly to prove Selznick wrong. Her relentless pursuit of the role was nothing short of extraordinary. Fate, or perhaps sheer persistence, finally intervened. Selznick's older brother, Myron, happened to be Olivier's agent. One evening, Myron brought Leigh to a gathering at Selznick's home. As Leigh stood in the flickering light of the burning Atlanta set, a famous scene being filmed that night, Myron turned to his brother and declared, "Hey genius, meet your Scarlett O'Hara." It was a moment of pure serendipity. Leigh's screen test sealed the deal. Her performance was described as incredibly wild and utterly captivating. Against all odds, she had won the role of a lifetime. Landing the part of Scarlett was no small feat. Leigh beat out a staggering 1,400 actresses, including Hollywood heavyweights like Tallulah Bankhead, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Greta Garbo, and Katharine Hepburn. It was a triumph, but the road ahead was anything but smooth. The production of Gone with the Wind was a grueling, chaotic ordeal that tested Leigh's resilience in ways she could never have imagined. The shoot dragged on for months, with Leigh regularly working 16-hour days. The stress was relentless, and she coped by chain-smoking up to 4 packs of cigarettes a day. At one point, the pressure became so unbearable that she overdosed on sleeping pills, a desperate cry for relief. The film's production was so troubled that it burned through 3 directors. The second, Howard Fleming, was so overwhelmed that he reportedly considered driving his car off a cliff. Even Leigh and her co-star, Clark Gable, were convinced the film would be a colossal flop. To add insult to injury, Selznick had one final humiliating demand. While he believed Leigh was perfect for the role, he thought her chest wasn't quite Scarlett-esque. He insisted she pad her bust to achieve the desired look. Leigh, ever the professional, complied, taping herself into the exaggerated silhouette Selznick envisioned. And then there was the pay disparity. Despite working nearly twice as many hours as Gable, Leigh earned only a fraction of his salary. It was a stark reminder of the inequalities that plagued Hollywood, even for its brightest stars. After the grueling, soul-crushing production of Gone with the Wind, Vivien Leigh must have felt a mix of exhaustion and elation. The film wasn't just a success. It was a cultural phenomenon, becoming the highest-grossing movie of all time, a record it held for decades. And Leigh's performance as Scarlett O'Hara? Nothing short of iconic. At just 26 years old, she took home the Academy Award for Best Actress, cementing her place in Hollywood history. It was a moment of triumph, a validation of all the blood, sweat, and tears she had poured into the role. But as the glittering night wore on, the celebration took a chilling turn. Winning an Oscar is the pinnacle of an actor's career, but for Laurence Olivier, Leigh's achievement was a bitter pill to swallow. According to Olivier's son, Tarquin, his father was consumed by jealousy. On the drive home from the ceremony, Olivier allegedly grabbed Leigh's Oscar and, in a fit of rage, came dangerously close to hitting her with it. "I was insane with jealousy," Olivier later confessed. It was a shocking moment, one that hinted at the cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship. Despite the rocky ride home, 1940 was a landmark year for Leigh and Olivier. After years of secrecy and scandal, their respective spouses finally agreed to divorce. By August, the couple was free to marry, and they did so in a quiet, intimate ceremony. Katharine Hepburn, a close friend, served as the matron of honor. It was a joyous occasion, but it came at a heartbreaking cost. As part of their divorce agreements, both Leigh and Olivier had to give up primary custody of their children. It was a devastating sacrifice, one that would haunt them for years to come. With their love no longer hidden, Leigh and Olivier set out to conquer the world together. Their first joint venture was a stage production of Romeo and Juliet, with Olivier as Romeo and Leigh as Juliet. They invested over $10,000 of their own money into the project, dreaming of theatrical glory. But the production was a disaster. Critics panned it, audiences stayed away, and the couple lost a small fortune. The failure was a blow to their egos and their finances, but it also strained their relationship. The cracks were beginning to show. Compounding their troubles was Leigh's worsening mental health. Her bipolar disorder, still poorly understood at the time, plunged her into terrifying episodes. Her agent described how Leigh's voice would turn hard, rasping, contemptuous, and her eyes, once warm and expressive, would become cold and unrecognizable, the eyes of a stranger. After these outbursts, Leigh would black out, waking up with no memory of what had happened. She would be left feeling ashamed, frightened, and deeply apologetic. It was a vicious cycle, one that took a toll on both Leigh and Olivier. But life wasn't done testing Vivien Leigh. In 1943, while volunteering for Allied troops in North Africa, she fell seriously ill. It wasn't until 1944 that she was diagnosed with tuberculosis, a brutal and potentially fatal disease. She spent months in the hospital, fighting for her life. Doctors eventually declared her recovered and released her, but they had made a grave mistake. The illness would linger, resurfacing years later with devastating consequences. After her brush with death, Leigh was determined to revive her film career. But Hollywood, once her playground, had become a minefield of disappointment. She was passed over for the lead role in her husband's film Rebecca, a part she desperately wanted. Then, in a decision she would later regret, she turned down the lead in Pride and Prejudice. The roles she did land were in a string of box office flops, leaving her career in a precarious position. Leigh was distraught, her confidence shaken. And as if that weren't enough, her personal life also began falling apart. In 1945, Vivien Leigh was on the set of Caesar and Cleopatra, a film that would ultimately join the ranks of her less successful projects. But for Leigh, the real tragedy wasn't the film's commercial failure. It was a devastating accident that would leave an indelible mark on her life. During one scene, Leigh was required to run across a freshly polished floor. She did as directed, but the slippery surface betrayed her. Leigh fell hard, and the consequences were catastrophic. At the time, she was pregnant, and the fall caused her to miscarry. The loss of her unborn child plunged Leigh into a deep, unrelenting depression. She would often be found weeping on the floor, consumed by grief. Film historians now believe this traumatic event was the first irreparable crack in her psyche, a turning point that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But Vivien Leigh was far more than her struggles. She was a woman of extraordinary talent and intellect, a force of nature who dazzled both on and off the screen. Fluent in at least 3 languages, Leigh was a polyglot with a razor-sharp mind. She adored Siamese cats, finding solace in their elegant, enigmatic presence. And then there was her photographic memory, a gift that left her co-stars and directors in awe. Leigh could memorize an entire play after reading it just once. On her worst days, she might need to read it twice. It's no wonder she became a legend. Her brilliance was as undeniable as her beauty. Yet, Leigh's bipolar disorder cast a long shadow over her life. It wasn't just the screaming fits or the crushing lows. It also manifested in ways that were deeply personal and profoundly disruptive. Her libido, for instance, would skyrocket during manic episodes, leading to intense, uncontrollable urges. In a desperate attempt to satisfy these desires, Leigh would sometimes seek out strangers, taxi drivers, delivery men, anyone who crossed her path. These impulsive encounters were a symptom of her illness, but they also placed immense strain on her marriage to Laurence Olivier. By 1948, Leigh and Olivier's once fairy tale romance was in tatters. The cracks that had begun to form years earlier had widened into chasms. During a performance in New Zealand, their private turmoil spilled out into the open in a shocking display of discord. Leigh, already on edge, had a meltdown over losing her footwear and refused to go on stage. Olivier, frustrated and embarrassed, lashed out at her, even striking her in front of the entire company. Leigh, never one to back down, hit him right back. It was a humiliating spectacle, one that Olivier later cited as a clear sign their marriage was doomed. The couple's troubles only deepened during their tour in Australia. It was there that Olivier discovered a rising star named Peter Finch, a young actor whose talent he immediately recognized. Olivier, ever the mentor, hired Finch to join the production, giving him a career-defining opportunity. But Finch's gratitude took a scandalous turn. Rather than thanking Olivier with flowers or a night out, Finch repaid his benefactor by embarking on an affair with Vivien Leigh. It was a betrayal that cut deep, but by this point, Olivier was too worn down to fight. In fact, some say he was almost relieved. After years of navigating Leigh's mood swings and insatiable desires, Olivier had reached a breaking point. Finch's involvement, while painful, offered a temporary reprieve from the relentless strain of their marriage. For Vivien Leigh, 1948 was a year of relentless turmoil. Her marriage to Laurence Olivier, once the envy of Hollywood, was crumbling under the weight of her bipolar disorder, his growing resentment, and the strain of their shared fame. Leigh's mental health was spiraling out of control, and her physical health wasn't faring much better. She battled extreme insomnia, often lying awake for hours, her mind racing with anxieties and regrets. Her impulse control, already fragile, began to erode further. The poised, elegant actress who had charmed the world with her grace and wit was now prone to shocking outbursts, ranting, raving, and swearing in ways that left those around her stunned, It was as if the pressure of her life had cracked her polished exterior, revealing the chaos within. Yet, even as her personal life unraveled, Leigh was on the brink of delivering one of the most iconic performances in cinematic history. The stereotype of the tormented artist exists for a reason, and Leigh embodied it in every sense. While grappling with her demons, she took on the role of Blanche DuBois in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. Blanche, a fragile Southern belle clinging to the remnants of her dignity, was a character as tragic as she was complex. For Leigh, the role was both a triumph and a curse. Over the course of more than 300 stage performances, she poured her soul into Blanche, channeling her own struggles with mental illness, loss, and despair. But the line between actress and character began to blur. Playing her tipped me into madness, Leigh later admitted. The role that would cement her legacy also exacted a devastating toll on her psyche. When Hollywood decided to adapt A Streetcar Named Desire for the screen, Leigh once again found herself fighting for the part. The director, Elia Kazan, wasn't convinced she was right for the role, but Leigh was determined. She lobbied fiercely, proving her commitment and depth as an actress. Her performance as Blanche was nothing short of mesmerizing, earning her a second Academy Award for Best Actress. But as with her first Oscar win, the triumph was fleeting. Almost immediately after her victory, Leigh plunged into a deep depression. The highs of her career were always shadowed by the lows of her personal struggles. Despite her battles, Leigh never lost her sense of humor, or her humility. In a move that perfectly encapsulated her irreverent charm, she repurposed one of her Oscars as a doorstop, using it to prop open her bathroom door. It was a small but telling gesture, a reminder that even amidst the chaos, Leigh remained grounded and self-aware. Even at her lowest points, Leigh's allure was undeniable. While filming A Streetcar Named Desire, her co-star Marlon Brando found himself captivated by her. He famously remarked on her unbeatable derriere, and later confessed that he had been tempted to pursue an affair. The only thing that stopped him, he claimed, was his respect for her husband, Laurence Olivier. Brando wasn't the only one drawn to Leigh's magnetic presence. Her charm was irresistible, even when her mental health was at its most fragile. In 1953, Leigh was cast in Elephant Walk, a film that promised to be a grand cinematic adventure. But the production quickly became a nightmare. Leigh's mental health deteriorated rapidly on set. She became paranoid, her insomnia worsened, and she began to hallucinate. The stress was so overwhelming that Paramount Studios made the unprecedented decision to replace her with Elizabeth Taylor. Before her departure, however, Leigh found solace in the arms of her co-star, none other than Peter Finch, her former lover. After being unceremoniously fired from Elephant Walk, Vivien Leigh boarded a flight back to Los Angeles, her mind a tempest of despair and confusion. The pressure of her mental breakdown, coupled with the humiliation of being replaced, proved too much to bear. Mid-flight, Leigh's anguish reached a breaking point. In a harrowing moment, she tried to end her life by attempting to jump out of the plane. It was a chilling testament to the depth of her suffering, a cry for help from a woman who had reached the edge of her endurance. By this point, Leigh's mental state was in freefall. Her behavior became increasingly erratic and uncontrollable. On set, she would scream for hours in her dressing room, her cries echoing through the studio until she was sedated and sent back to England. Laurence Olivier, her husband and once her greatest supporter, felt he had no choice but to take drastic action. He made the heart-wrenching decision to place Leigh in an asylum, where she spent 3 agonizing months undergoing electroshock therapy. The treatment, though intended to help, left her physically and emotionally scarred. Burn marks from the electroshock paddles marred her pale temples, a visible reminder of the pain she endured. Leigh's struggles should have remained private, but in the world of Hollywood, secrets rarely stay buried. When she returned to the stage in England, audiences were captivated, not by her performance, but by the whispers of her breakdown. People claimed they could see the marks left by the electroshock therapy, a grim testament to her suffering. It was a cruel twist of fate for a woman who had once been celebrated for her beauty and talent. By this time, Leigh and Olivier's marriage was hanging by a thread. They had survived Leigh's affair with Peter Finch, but the cracks in their relationship were too deep to ignore. On stage, audiences could hear the couple taunting each other during performances, their private strife spilling into the public eye. Offstage, Leigh became fixated on scathing reviews that accused Olivier of deliberately underplaying his roles to avoid overshadowing her. Olivier tried to reassure her that the critiques were baseless, but the damage was done. The trust between them was eroding, and their once unbreakable bond was fraying. In 1956, at the age of 44, Leigh discovered she was pregnant, a miracle that she hoped would breathe new life into her faltering marriage. She dreamed of a fresh start, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. But fate had other plans. Leigh suffered another miscarriage, plunging her into a devastating depressive spiral. The loss was a cruel echo of her earlier tragedy, a reminder of the fragility of her hopes and dreams. The combination of losing her baby and playing yet another tragic Shakespearean role proved to be a volatile mix for Leigh. While touring Europe in a production of Titus Andronicus, she suffered a catastrophic breakdown. In one shocking incident, she wandered into a public park without her clothes on, a stark manifestation of her unraveling mind. Later, in a fit of rage, she attacked Olivier with a wet towel, prompting him to throw her across the room in a moment of desperation. It was a scene of chaos and heartbreak, a far cry from the glamorous couple they had once been. After nearly 2 decades together, Olivier had reached his limit. He left Leigh and began a new life with Joan Plowright, a relationship that offered him the stability he craved. Reflecting on their time together, Olivier admitted that he would never love anybody as much as Vivien, but her relentless mood swings and erratic behavior made it impossible for him to stay. The once unbeatable couple, the darlings of Hollywood, had finally reached the end of their story. In the wake of their separation, Leigh found solace in the arms of actor Jack Marival. He was well aware of her bipolar disorder and assured Olivier that he would take care of her. With Leigh and Marival's care, Olivier felt he could finally move on. He officially divorced Leigh in 1960, ending one of the most storied romances in Hollywood history. Despite the divorce, Olivier tried to maintain an amicable relationship with Leigh. In a poignant letter, he thanked her for handling their breakup nobly and bravely and beautifully, acknowledging the pain it must have caused her. But Olivier's words, though kind, couldn't heal Leigh's wounds. Around this time, she attempted to take her own life, a heartbreaking testament to her ongoing struggle with mental illness. After her marriage ended, Leigh's behavior became increasingly erratic. She once rented a car and became so incensed by its color that she demanded it be repainted. She also insisted on carrying her prized Renoir and Picasso paintings with her wherever she went, as if clinging to the remnants of her glamorous past. In a bid to find purpose, Leigh returned to the stage, hoping that acting would provide a creative outlet and a sense of stability. But the stage, once her sanctuary, could no longer save her. In 1963, Vivien Leigh took on the role of a lifetime in the stage musical Tovarich. But what should have been a triumphant return to the theater turned into a harrowing spectacle. Leigh, already grappling with the relentless grip of her bipolar disorder, suffered a catastrophic breakdown during the production. On stage, in front of a packed house, she blanked on her lines, raced through songs at triple speed, and even lashed out at her co-stars. Her behavior was so erratic and uncontrollable that at one point she had to be physically restrained and sedated. It was a heartbreaking scene, a stark contrast to the poised and radiant star the world had come to adore. Yet, even amidst the chaos, Leigh's talent shone through. Against all odds, she won a Tony Award for her performance, a bittersweet victory for a woman whose brilliance was increasingly overshadowed by her struggles. Leigh's battle with bipolar disorder was a constant, unwelcome companion throughout her life. But during the filming of Ship of Fools in 1965, her illness took a particularly dark turn. In a scene that required her to strike co-star Lee Marvin with a high heel, Leigh's emotions spiraled out of control. She hit him with such force that it left a permanent scar on his face. The incident was a grim reminder of the toll her illness was taking, not just on her, but on those around her. Ship of Fools would mark Leigh's final appearance on film, a poignant end to a storied career. Sadly, the time she had left was fleeting, and it would be marked by profound sadness. In the summer of 1967, Leigh's long-standing battle with tuberculosis returned with a vengeance. Confined to her bed, she fought to recover, but her body was too weakened to withstand the illness. One fateful night, she rose to use the washroom and collapsed on the way. By the time her devoted partner, Jack Marival, found her, Leigh had already taken her last breath. She passed away in London on July 8, 1967, at the age of 53. The world had lost one of its brightest stars. Even though Leigh and Laurence Olivier had been divorced for 7 years, the news of her death hit him like a thunderbolt. Olivier rushed to her side, insisting on staying with her body until the authorities arrived. It was a final act of devotion to the woman who had once been his greatest love. Together with Marival, Olivier helped organize Leigh's funeral, ensuring she was cremated and her ashes scattered near her beloved home. It was a quiet, intimate farewell for a woman who had lived so much of her life in the spotlight. When news of Leigh's passing spread, the world mourned. In a poignant tribute, every theater in London dimmed its lights for an hour, honoring the legacy of a woman who had brought so much beauty and passion to the stage. But perhaps the most touching tribute came from Olivier himself. In the weeks before his own death, Olivier reportedly watched one of Leigh's films. As the screen flickered with images of her luminous presence, he began to weep. This was love," he whispered. It was a simple yet profound acknowledgement of the bond they had shared, a love that had burned brightly, even if it couldn't last forever. Leigh, too, had once reflected on their relationship with deep emotion. "I would rather have lived a short life with Larry Olivier than face a long one without him," she said. It was a testament to the depth of her feelings, a reminder that their love, though fraught with challenges, had been one of the defining forces of her life. Vivien Leigh's story is one of extraordinary talent, devastating vulnerability, and enduring love. She was a woman who gave everything to her art, even as it took everything from her. Her legacy lives on, not just in the films and performances she left behind, but in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the lights of the theaters that once dimmed in her honor.